Welcome to this Aegon Global Pensions webinar on pensions in Europe. My name is Martijn Tans. I'm a director at Aegon Global Pensions. Aegon Global Pensions has recently published a survey on pensions in Europe. I will be discussing the survey with the three authors of this report. On my left, we have Thurstan Robinson. Thurstan is a pension specialist and communications manager. Thurstan has a doctorate from Oxford University and works extensively on Aegon Global Pensions research papers and articles. Next to him, we have Heleen Vaandrager. Heleen is a regional sales director in Europe. She has over 20 years experience working with large multinational companies in the area of employee benefits and international pensions. On the far left, we have Erik Schouten. Erik is a tax and legal consultant. He has extensive experience in international pensions issues and has most recently been heavily involved with the Dutch cross-border pensions vehicle, the PPI. Throughout the webinar, you will have the opportunity to ask questions to the panel. Please use the Q&A functionality that you see in your screen. At the end of the session, I will relay these questions to the panelists. And with that, I think we can start. Heleen, we will begin with you. What is the European Pension Survey?
Yes, Martijn. I think it's good to go back to the very beginning, to the main reasoning why we did this European Pension Survey. From experience, we knew that there were a lot of things happening in the European pensions field. The companies were moving. We had a lot of political action also and political changes in Europe. And so we wanted to know exactly where companies stand and how they were dealing with their pensions policy. So instead of doing a desk survey, we thought it would be better to go directly to the companies and discuss with them what their main drivers were in the pensions field. So we went, so to speak, to the coalface and visited all the global pensions directors, comp and ben managers, finance directors, everybody who had a say in their global pensions policies. And over the past year, so we started midway 2010 and ended at the end of 2011. It was surprising to see how open and frank those companies were and how much they let us into their pension policy. And therefore, this study made us understand what multinational companies are doing right now, what are the major issues for them, and how do they see the futures. Apart from the companies, we interviewed also the international pension consultants, as well as the legislators and the regulators in the European pensions field.
Yeah, to add to that, Heleen, when you look at cross-border pensions, we see that there's been much interest in the last few years, and our survey shows that all the respondents are the concept is very attractive to all the companies interviewed. We see that the multinational corporations want to simplify pensions management across Europe. They want to remove complexity and they want to increase control, and they're looking for ways to manage and to provide pensions across borders. But pensions, cross-border pensions specifically, is quite complex when you look at the legal framework, and the European Commission is looking for ways to make it more easy. So in fact, we analyzed the main issues companies face in managing their pensions in Europe, and on the other hand, how activities of the European Commission can make it more easy to do that.
Okay. So Thurstan, what did you expect to learn from this group of companies? Is this a representative sample of companies in Europe?
I suppose the answer to that is both yes and no. What we wanted to achieve with this survey, we wanted it to be a qualitative survey, so this is not a random sample of companies. Initially, we supposed that there may be national and cultural differences between companies, so we wanted to select companies that had operations in Europe, pensions in Europe, but we deliberately selected companies that had their headquarters across Europe, both within the European Union and outside the European Union. And that includes also companies headquartered in the United States. these are all leading multinational companies, and they're all companies that have an international head of pensions benefits. And then, in addition to the companies that we interviewed, as Heleen said, we also interviewed representatives of the European Commission, international benefits consultants, supervisory bodies, and representative bodies.
Okay. So when you have interviewed these companies, I think we can read in the paper that you have identified 3 main themes that come across in all of the interviews. So we can read about governance becoming increasingly important. You talk about the decline in defined benefit pensions, and you talk about the rise of defined contribution, but also the concerns that companies have with the improvements that need to be made with DC to make it future-proof. So I think it would be a good idea to dive into these 3 themes a little more. So Heleen, we will begin with governance. I think before we get into that, it's maybe a good idea to get the definitions straight.
Yes, indeed, especially with the word governance, because it has become a kind of buzzword and everybody understands something else under it. So the way we have used governance in our paper is corporate governance, so the internal structuring of the managing their pensions in a given company. So it has nothing to do in the sense of governance towards regulation and regulatory governance or corporate governance, but really in the company itself. And here we have seen that there is really an increased consistent management towards pensions, and this was really surprising because all the companies we have interviewed have been busy in reorganizing their pension governance, so the pension bodies. They all have a global pensions board, which were up to the highest level. There are representatives from HR, finance and risk management in order to look carefully after their pensions internationally. And that was really surprising. We have also seen that 2/3 of those companies had already pension guidelines, lining out what will happen and in the future with their pension management. And the 1/3 which didn't have that was busy in formulating it. So it was really a very strong tendency. And what was even more surprising concerning the content of these pension guidelines is that the strategy towards de-risking was present in all of their pension guidelines.
Okay. So I guess that takes us to the second common theme of defined benefit being in decline. Thurstan, can you give some more background to that?
Yes, I don't think that it comes as a surprise to hear that defined benefit pensions are in decline with the financial and economic crisis and increasing regulatory pressure. All companies with defined benefit pensions have been feeling intensified pressure to de-risk. But what surprised us a little bit with the survey was the near unanimity of all of these companies that defined benefit pensions are finished to all intents and purposes. Nearly every single one of the companies interviewed either had an implicit or explicit policy in place that all new pensions from now on should be defined contribution and that defined benefit pension schemes should be closed. And those companies that still have defined benefit pension plans are looking at ways to de-risk them.
Okay. So then it is understandable that that DC is an important issue to look at. Erik, what sort of things have you found out in that area from your discussions?
Yeah, like Thurstan already said, there's a strong move from defined benefit to defined contribution systems, but many respondents see shortcomings in the DC, the defined contribution system. They feel responsible for their employees during employment, but also after employment. They see a role in developing a good pension income for their employees. As one respondent said, and I quote, with DC pensions, I'm concerned that in the future, employees may feel that they do not have sufficient savings and will look to the company to compensate them for this. The issue is about delivering DC more intelligently. There's much more to be done, and DC is going to change enormously over the next few years. And I think he's right. Employers want to avoid employees who simply cannot afford to retire. So the DC pension plan will have to provide for adequate pension income.
Okay, so that gives us a good overview, I think, of sort of the common elements that we see in corporate pensions. How about the differences that you saw?
Yes, although the companies interviewed, they were all affected by these similar issues. It's clear that they adopt different approaches when it comes to their pensions management. Initially, we supposed that the home country of the company head office may have an effect on the way that companies approach their pensions and manage their pensions, but that effect was not in fact visible. Instead, we found the companies falling into categories. We profiled them according to how centralized the company's management was in general and how centralized their pensions management was in particular, and also the general approach or philosophy that these companies had towards pensions. So what we mean by that is some companies, when you ask them about pensions as a benefit, they think it's part of a general benefits package. It's not particularly important in some markets. They consider it not to be important at all, and they provide one where they have to. And on the other hand, we have companies who say, in an aging world, pensions are very important. We can see states pulling back from state provision of pensions, and we consider pensions to be something that will provide us with competitive advantage in the future, and we see it as our responsibility as a company to look after our employees once they've retired, so they take more responsibility for their pensions. So on that basis, we categorized these companies, and we have the visionary companies, the Trailblazer companies, the pragmatic companies, and the transformers.
Okay. So Heleen, I understand this typology. Maybe we can zoom in and look at how this works in practice. So maybe with Trailblazers, how do they implement their pension strategies?
Yes, Martijn, this is a very interesting group. As Thurstan already explained, we have categorized them in those 4 archetypes. It's just a mere indication of how they deal with their pensions. The Trailblazers are the centralized, more centralized companies with a centralized pension management, and at the same time they are also thought leaders. So those are the ones who have a very well established pensions policies. Most of the time they have large defined benefit schemes, in-house expertise, a good team and time and money to dedicate to pensions. So they have a very clear idea of where they want to go with their pensions, and this already for some time. So the Trailblazer companies were the companies which already in 2003 started with asset pooling, cross-border pension schemes, and really take good care that their pension management is enrolled in the whole company. And especially visionaries, but also the other companies are looking closely to those Trailblazers, what they're doing with their pensions.
Okay, so they attract a lot of attention in what they do. How about the opposite side of the spectrum? So you talk about transformers. Can you give a little bit of background to their thinking?
Transformers are exactly the other side of the spectrum. So those are the decentralized companies with more of a no-nonsense approach. So it means that those companies are in a different pace, obviously, also of their business management. Those are the companies who are busy with mergers, acquisitions, very often in the heavy industry, very often also in other parts of the world where pensions are not found to be so important as part of the benefits package. So those companies, what they do is they try to let their pension policy follow their business policy. So when they buy and sell companies, they need to have pension policies which can also be wrapped up and sold quickly. So those are the companies which are very forward in the way of their de-risking strategy. So it's also a very interesting type of company. It was by no means for us a way of saying those companies are better or more advanced than others, but just to see how the pension strategy follows automatically the business approach.
Okay. So we have a question coming in that I think is appropriate to ask now, is when companies implement their strategy, whether they are trailblazers or transformers, it is important that the local unit participates, that they see the benefit in that. Do you see that issue? And
this is a very important issue. I think it's the only way to make a strategy work. So you really need the local buy-in. Already historically, pensions were part of HR and the local HR policy, the benefits policy. It's the way to attract and retain personnel. So if you start changing anything in that, you have to be very careful that you don't hit either or unions or that you get into trouble to make your local company work well. So what you have to do when you make those changes is not only to make a good business case from corporate level and strategic from finance level, but particularly a very good case also at local level and at HR level.
Okay. So what I hear in your answers and also in what you can see in the paper is that these companies operate in Europe. That's also one of the topics that you set out to research in this paper. So maybe Thurstan, in your experience or in your discussions with corporates, how do they look at Europe?
Well, I think that the general consensus seems to be that Europe is still a complex environment in which to operate, and particularly so when it comes to pensions. Europe is a single economic market, but it is still a market of 27 sovereign states, and that has various repercussions. Having said that, if we look at how companies approach cross-border pension solutions, we can see a clear difference between the different types of companies that we identified. So in general, 80% of the companies that we spoke to, in principle, were interested in the concept of cross-border pension solutions. But having said that, more than half of them had deep reservations about the likelihood of actually being able to use any of these cross-border solutions in the near future. If we look at the Trailblazer companies, these companies are working on, developing, and in some cases already have cross-border pension solutions in place. But if we look at the pragmatic companies on the other end of the scale, several of these companies said, well, we looked at it and it's just something we're not interested in. And the other types of companies fall in the middle. The reasons for that, I think, are partly historical. As Heleen described earlier, the Trailblazer companies, these are companies that have a tradition of defined benefit pensions. They're centralized companies. They're used to looking at issues with pensions across border. Okay. They have the management facilities in place. So it's natural that they will use these resources to capture gains where they see them to be made. On the other end of the scale, pensions have typically sat with HR departments, and HR departments have typically not been cross-border. So it's a historical fact, I think, that several companies have just not been set up in a way that will encourage them to look across border for pension solutions.
Okay.
And then I suppose finally that returning back to the point of Europe, it is pensions in Europe sit in this area that straddles European and national laws and regulations. So
that's what's making it complicated for companies to operate in, and
absolutely.
Maybe some companies are more used to working in that environment.
And they have the resources in-house
to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a closer look at Europe then, and this grey area that you refer to, Erik. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. What does this grey area look like, and if it is a complication, how is Europe dealing with that?
First of all, it's important to understand what is Europe in this case. At the one hand, you have the 27 different member states, and on the other hand, you have the European Commission, the European Parliament, so the institutions of the European Union. And it is a grey area indeed, legislation surrounding pensions. For instance, when you look at national consumer protection legislation and financial prudential legislation, both the European Union and the member states have influence in that legislation. The European Union first starts with a directive, and then the local member states have to implement that directive in their local legislation. So it's an area in which both have their influence. But pensions is not just a financial product, it's a very important part of the remuneration package. So that means that social and labor law play also a very important role in all the laws surrounding pensions. And the social and labor law, that's specifically law that's been made by the member states. So the European Union doesn't have anything to say about that legislation. So it's quite a mixed picture of different legislations and different powers of the European Union and the member states.
Okay, and in their efforts to bring this forward, there is talk of green papers and white papers. Can you talk a little bit about that, and what are those papers and what do they aim to do?
Yes, certainly. Go back one step. When you look at cross-border pension vehicles, the directive making it possible for pension vehicles to operate cross-border was implemented in 2003. And at this moment, only 80 pension vehicles are really operating cross-border. And that's not much if you know that there are more than 100,000 pension funds, pension vehicles in Europe. The European Commission is very concerned about that, and they are taking all kinds of initiatives to speed up that pace. And the Green Paper is one of those initiatives. And the Green Paper was published last year, and it gives a view of the European Commission how they look at pensions. And they're not just looking at the financial or legal or social elements of pensions, but they are integrating it into a holistic view on pensions. The Green Paper was open for discussion. All stakeholders could give their opinion to the European Commission, and we are expecting the White Paper this month.
Okay. And do we know already a little bit what's in the White Paper, or?
Yes, a draft version has been leaked.
Yeah.
And when you look at that, it gives, I think it's an important step in the development of a pan-European pension policy. It entails the vision of the European Commission and has anticipated and has also taken care of all the input the stakeholders gave. There are also 25 pension initiatives, policy initiatives in that white paper. Almost half of them contain words like monitor, encourage, recommendations, call on. So it looks like the ambitions of the European Commission have been watered down a bit. But on the other hand, when you look at the policy initiatives that are in the white paper, for instance, it announces the review of the directive concerning cross-border pension vehicles. They want to modernize it, and they to speed up the cross-border pension plans. And they also have a proposal prepared for the portability. So when employees move across member states, that it's more easy for them to take their pension capital with them. And at least, finally, there are planned suggestions for a pension tracking service. So it makes it more easy for employees to look what are their pension entitlements.
There's a question that comes in now and that I think fits right into this discussion. And there's a question around concerns that trustees may have over the ability to transfer existing benefits into new European structures. Can you talk about that, Erik, from a legislative point of view, or maybe Heleen from your experience in dealing?
Yes, I suppose that you're refer to liabilities, past liabilities of defined benefit schemes, and to transfer those.
So exactly.
Yeah, so I think that in this new IORPS 2 directive, so the first IORP was a legal framework in order to make a pension plan with one legal framework, one financial and solvency framework, but still reporting local, social and fiscal regulations locally. So this IORP regulation has been used, or if you look at the Commission, they think has been abused in order for DB plans to look for the lowest solvency margin. And now in the new IORP regulation, the aim of the European Commission is to make it better and more and easier for cross-border pension plans, but to prevent what they call regulatory arbitrage. So this regulatory arbitrage means that is exactly to finding the way to the lowest solvency level. So they would like to prevent that. So that is something which is probably going to be more and more difficult. But at the same time, the hopes are that it can be used easier by multinational companies for a good management and a good governance and control of their European pension systems or European supplementary pension systems.
So again, the review and the new IORP directive are important developments for this aspect as well.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so when also listening to your answer to this, it looks like there is a lot of things depending on what the Commission is going to do in the future with this review that may end up in a revised IORP. So does that mean that the market, that companies, sponsors are basically in a standstill mode, waiting for that to happen, or Heleen, how do you see that?
That's not actually how I would see it. It is true that there are some companies who are have this wait-and-see approach and are looking for solutions already ready, and those companies maybe are waiting a little. However, there are a lot of other companies who see already a business case in cross-border pensions and move. It may be also partial solutions, like for instance asset pooling, because that is a solution which is already there and which can be used. And in this idea of the collective management of assets, it works very well for having a global governance in your company, better control, less risk, and one investment strategy. So there are certainly things going on. That's also what you see in these pension guidelines. At the same time, also in the DC world, there are more and more companies who are looking at setting up a cross-border defined contribution platform. So international companies are making themselves ready for the future, for certain. Yeah.
Okay. So there's movement there. How about providers, Thurstan? How do they approach this?
No, I think it's partly the reflection of what Heleen just said. If we look at what's happening in the field of providers, we can see specialized providers starting to produce distinct solutions, partial solutions, if you like, for these companies. You can think of multi-country administration systems, IT systems, asset pooling, and insurance solutions. And we can see that companies are looking at ways to piece these distinct solutions together. In the paper, we referred to the concept of a shared service centre for pensions, and I think this is a useful way to look at this type of centralized solutions. And returning to asset pooling, it's a good case in point, I think. When we interviewed the companies, 60% of the companies we interviewed were interested in principle in asset pooling. And if we look at the development of asset pooling over the past few years, since 2000, we can see that the companies that started off with asset pooling were these large centralized companies with DB plans. So Shell, Nestle, Unilever, they built these bespoke one-off asset pooling solutions. They had the assets under management to make that pay. But the smaller companies, at the time, it didn't make sense. They didn't have the capabilities. They didn't have the assets. What we see now is that multi-client asset pooling solutions have been developed, and these are available to smaller companies to pool their assets into these pools. So you see the development of these solutions, and I don't think we're at the situation. I don't think any company is looking at a single big bang solution to cross-border pensions, but what we'll see is this step-by-step approach, and the providers will respond to that.
Okay, so you refer to asset pooling, and Heleen, so did you, and I understand what you say about the development in that. Maybe it's a good idea to just get the definitions also straight. So what is asset pooling exactly? How does it relate to pension pooling? Are they words for the same thing, or?
Well, no, in fact, there is a distinct difference between that. So pension pooling, when you're talking about pensions, normally you're referring to the assets and the liabilities, so the full retirement scheme. As this is still a rather complex situation, when we talked before, we said so this IOP regulation frees the way to have a financial cross-border arrangement, legal framework, but the local social and fiscal regulations are still separate in each and every country. And so with pension pooling, you will still have a local contributions and a local payout phase, because those are linked to fiscal rules as well as social rules. But at the same time, the assets side of the collective management of the assets is already possible. So that's why asset pooling is something which has already cleared the way, where we can go ahead with. Pension pooling is a bit more complex to do at this stage.
So the reason for that complexity is in the legal and in the tax environment, I think, Erik. So can we be hopeful that we will see true harmonization on the tax front, for instance, to arrive at this sort of ultimate dream of one European scheme?
Well, I think that's going to take a while. When you look at the tax law, you have to see two different views. One of them is the local tax law regarding pensions. Every country has the right to make its own laws and regulations, and the European Union can't harmonize that. On the other hand, the European Commission can and acts on discrimination. And with that I mean, if you as a country make it possible that if contributions are paid to a pension fund or a pension vehicle inside your country, it's deductible. But you forbid deductibility when you pay contributions to a pension fund outside of your country. That's discrimination, and the European Commission and the European Court of Justice has taken action to forbid that. And the situation is now that it's possible to contribute to pension funds in your country, inside your country, or inside another country, and the fiscal deductibility is the same in both cases.
Okay, there's a question that's come in that I think is appropriate here. The question is, do you see a role for super trusts in managing cross-border pensions?
Super trusts in managing cross-border pensions. So you mean one trust for all those schemes instead of a local pension trust and boards? Yes, I think that actually would solve a good problem for a lot of companies, because when we interviewed those companies, also one of their major concerns was to find good expertise, people who were willing and able to handle the pensions and be the trustee of their pension board. And this becomes more and more of a problem due to the fact that the regulation in that respect is getting more and more stringent. So the liability on the person and on the personal liability is increasing, and therefore they can find less and less good people, and therefore this would indeed, if you call it a master trust or a super trust, this would indeed solve the problem, because then instead of having in 10 countries 10 pension boards, you would have one pension board with one set of trustees in a distinct place. So I really think that this is something which is a distinct trend.
So true harmonization on the tax and the legal side is still a way off. Although we have some developments there, but still a long way off. But on the governance side, IORPs or master trusts do provide an additional benefit in cross-border pensions.
Indeed. If you also see what the main drivers were for the companies who already went into IORPs and cross-border pension schemes, all of them said it's a better control and a better governance. So that is for them very important, and that already solves this problem. The economies of scale is also important, but that comes at a secondary or a third place. Okay. So this would indeed solve it.
I think one thing to add here maybe is also the European Commission itself has set up a research project to look into the possibility of setting up a European-wide pension fund for researchers. And that's presently still in research phase, but the European Commission itself is looking at how to set up something that will provide pensions to, I suppose it's like an industry-wide fund for researchers or something like that. But we can expect maybe to see some results on that in the next year.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And then Erik, in moving forward, how do countries position themselves in this? I think we see developments. I know that you're quite involved in the PPI. Can you speak about that?
Of course. When you look at the IOP directive, which made it possible to operate cross-border as a pension vehicle, that came into force in 2003, and there were a few countries that implemented that directive very quickly in their local legislation. Luxembourg, Belgium, and Ireland, for instance. And Belgium is quite successful with their OFP in that regard. But other countries are catching up. And in the Netherlands, for instance, since the beginning of this year, it's possible to start a PPI, and that's a premium pension institution, which is a cross-border vehicle for defined contribution pension schemes.
Okay. So there's developments on that front as well. So even though the sort of the holy grail is still eluding us, there's actually sort of significant developments going on today. Is I think my summary of what you're saying. Now, if we take now a longer term perspective to round off also this part of the session, I will ask each of the panelists to give us your view with a longer term perspective. Where is this going to go? Heleen, maybe you can start.
Yes, I think maybe apart from, or not only giving my own view on the situation, but after having these 30 interviews with major companies and major consultants and legislators, there is a clear tendency of what they see as is the risk and what are the opportunities in the pension field. So if we start with the risk and a threat for the systems, they clearly say that with the change from defined benefit to defined contribution, there is a clear risk that the defined contribution system in the end will fail to give a proper and a sufficient pension. This was already brought up by Erik in the beginning when he was quoting one of the companies. But in more or lesser sense, or in different words, all the companies say we have to be careful with this change to defined contribution, that we don't do it only for cost reasons, that we contribute enough, that we learn the employees how to invest their money and to make them more financial literate, and also that we help them in the payout phase so that they are not left behind with too little money to retire on. Also in the sense, in the light of the longevity, people living longer and therefore needing more money. So this was a big risk, and I think that this is shared by the whole industry, and everybody has his own role to play in order to make that right. And the opportunity mentioned also by 90% of the companies is still have a better cross-border pension system, and to be able to take advantage of the economies of scale in this respect.
Okay. Erik, what's your final thoughts on this?
Well, I think we can expect a lot from Europe in the near future. The European Commission is very active on the pensions in the pensions area. Think of the publication of the white paper, for instance, and all the policy initiatives that are taken up in the white paper. The review of the IORP directive, the directive on cross-border pension vehicles, for instance. So I think that's going to change a lot in the pensions market, but until now the European Union didn't operate very quickly. The current IORP directive, it took 10 years to implement it, but I think that both the member states and the European Commission, they are I'm convinced that they have to move quicker than they did until now, especially in the light of the economic situation, of course.
Okay. Thurstan.
Yeah, I think I can just really reconfirm what Heleen just said. The one thing that the interviewees returned to time and again was we have to ensure that DC pensions are fit for the future. And as one of the interviewers said, he said pure DB has its faults, but pure DC is far from perfect. I think that encapsulates it. So we see that lots of these companies are looking at how they can provide DC pensions more intelligently. And several of them are actively working at cross-border DC, so looking how they can deliver these efficiencies across borders. And I think we're going to see a lot of activity in this space in the coming years.
All right, thank you, Thurstan and Heleen and Erik for this overview. We will now proceed with our question and answer session. We have a few questions coming in already, but please, if you have any questions, then use the Q&A box in your screen. They will appear here, and I will relay them to the panelists. Let me start because Thurstan, you spoke about DC in your final comments. Let me just read this out loud. How common is it to have real DC strategies, as opposed to that the strategy is really focused on just getting out of DB? How common do you see proper DC strategies?
I think if we look at the way that we categorized the companies, I think more or less every single group had a particular strategy. Now, I say more or less because I think the transformers fall into a separate department there, because as we're saying that the transformers are focused very much on mergers and acquisitions and agility. So that's a slightly different approach. But if we look at the pragmatists, the approach was we want DC pensions. They knew very much what they wanted from their DC pensions. They were very specific about the levels that they wanted to pay into them and where they wanted to be with relation to the rest of the market. So there you can say there's a very clear strategy. Yeah. If we look at the visionaries and the trailblazers, again, I think the visionaries we're looking forward and saying we see that we want pensions. We see that they have an important role to play. We want to develop them in such a way that they can play that role. And if you look at the types of companies that they were, they tended not to have a very large DB legacy. What they actually had was a DC legacy. So what they were trying to do is take all their different DC plans that were different all around the world and say, no, what we want to do is to get them aligned and to follow certain rules. And then the trailblazers, I think very clearly we were seeing that they are they have a strategy in mind, and what they're looking to do now is to try to intelligent DC drive some efficiency gains across borders and to hand on some benefits to the employees.
Yes, I think if you're looking at actually strategy to be innovative, then again it's the trailblazers who have designed cross-border DC platforms in an intelligent way. If it's just a strategy of a policy and executing, then you see it with all companies. But really, again, the innovative ideas come from the trailblazers. Okay,
all right. There's also a few questions coming in on the piece where you spoke about IORPs. Erik and Heleen, you both had things to say. So about regulatory arbitrage. So there's a question here: how is the removal of regulatory arbitrage consistent with fundamentally different pension regimes, tax, social security, labor laws? So whilst I understand the issue, this feels unachievable without a single tax legal structure for all EU pensions.
Yeah, I think that this ruling on regulatory arbitrage has more to do with the solvency rules. Yeah. And so what they try to do, and indeed it is very difficult because also solvency has been defined different by country, but what they try to do, and that's the overall tendency, to give clearer definition and more uniform definition. And so they start with the solvency rules so that it becomes more and more difficult for companies say, okay, we go to another country where we have a lower level. So if all the levels have the same definitions, you will prevent regulatory arbitrage.
In the area of solvency.
Exactly, and it doesn't mean that the local labor law and fiscal law, for instance, have to be harmonized. Yeah. So those are two different, separate aspects.
Areas.
Yes.
I understand. Then there is another question, and Erik, I think this one is for you. Can you elaborate on the advantages and disadvantages of different types of IORPs? So PPIs, OFPs, master trusts, for a company that wants to integrate their cross-border pensions?
It's a good question, and it can take a very long time to answer that. But just to say some words on that, first of all, it depends on what kind of pension scheme do you have. Is it a defined benefit scheme or a defined contribution scheme, for instance? Yeah. When you look at the PPI, the Dutch cross-border pension vehicle, it's only possible to have defined contribution schemes in that vehicle. So if you have a DB plan and you want to organize cross-border, it's not possible to use the PPI, but it is possible to use the OFP in Belgium, for instance. Okay. So that's one major element that's very important. Another element which is important is what Heleen was talking about the solvency regime of the different countries. Mm-hmm.
Recently there came a new tax on assets in Ireland. So that also means that a lot of people, companies now deciding for the best location of their IORP will definitely not choose Ireland.
So they were in this game. Maybe they still are, but it's becoming a little bit less attractive, and
due
so your
to fiscal
tax fiscal reasons.
Aspects.
Okay.
But obviously there are many factors, and it takes a little bit longer to
exactly.
to explain. Yeah.
Then there is a question here on the costs of administration. So if there's an IORP put in place and there's different social and labor laws to take into account, does that mean that the cost of administration goes up just because of the complexity of having to deal with that?
Well, it doesn't have to go up because you have that complexity already at a local level. So the idea is just that it goes down because you have at certain levels, like the custodian and legal framework and trustees, you have less cost. Okay. However, it is also not an enormous cost saving. But if you look at the drivers of the multinational companies implementing such an IORP, the cost issue is not the number one, but it has other drivers which are more important.
The governance and
indeed.
Yeah, I understand.
And the control.
So the cost of administration may go down somewhat,
Yes.
So if the question is asked in the context of, can we hope to achieve a lot of efficiencies by cross-border pensions, then I think your answer is, well, due to these differences in social and labor laws, let's not be too hopeful that there's a lot of efficiencies there.
But also we should add, if you're asset pooling underneath, then there are efficiency gains to be made there. So it's a series of savings.
Yes. And it is also a question of maybe getting a higher cost, an implementation cost in the beginning, but the longer it runs and the more countries and assets you have in it, the lower the cost gets.
And I think the thing about shared service centres applies again, shared service centres for finance. There were different financial regulations, and these things, they take investment to set up, but then you realise the efficiencies.
It pays off in time.
Okay. There is a question around DC and DB. So we talk about those two different sort of types of schemes. And the question here so in the UK in particular, the question is here, the DC is going to be a leave to a lot of disappointment because members are not engaged. And on a like-for-like comparison, DC is not as efficient as defined benefit. Do you agree with that statement is the question? And if so, I guess what are the implications of that for corporates in their strategy?
Well, I think it really depends on what type of DC and what type of DB, and there's also a lot of re-engineering going on there. But if you give an individual all the possible investment choices there, you have not only the risk of people who are not literate with those investment vehicle or investment possibilities, but you have also the risk that the cost obviously increase a lot. And so that is a clear risk, but it depends how it's set up, how the scheme is set up. So it's
I think from the interviews, it's also, this is one of the things that the companies were very aware of. They were saying, we realised that we need to do something for the employees, and one of the things is costs need to come down, but it's not just cost, it's we need to help them and I mean this is one of the things with the cross-border efficiencies. It's saying that we as a company have the scale where we can help our employees by putting together a package that we can then offer to all of the employees. So
indeed, because if you look at, for instance, a DB, that the whole responsibility is for the employer, and DC, everything rests on the shoulders of the employees. I think there are a lot of employers who want to take either or the risk or the cost or some of the burden from their shoulders. So I think it's just the beginning of the change, but in the end we will see different products where it is more like for like, a DB and a DC.
Like in the Netherlands, you have the CDC, it's a collective defined contribution, and that's more or less in between defined contribution and defined benefit, and it combines the best of both worlds, so to speak. So there are possibilities to convert DB to DC, but not to give all the risks to the employee.
Okay. So this is a Dutch scheme or type of scheme that you refer to. Now there's a question here on something that is prevalent in the UK called salary sacrifice. Is that something that you see across Europe as well, or is that mostly UK?
Yeah, you see it in some countries as well. It's making it fiscally more attractive in order to save individually. And I think that these systems and matching systems will become more and more important because people need to save more for the future. And if the first pillar is coming down, the second pillar is decreasing, it has to come from the third pillar.
And this is one of the hopes of the white paper, I think.
Exactly, that's one of the elements that's taken up in the white paper. And exactly what Heleen says, if you see that the pension building in three pillars, and the first pillar is the state pension, it's going down. The second pillar, the occupational pensions, well, we discussed about the B and DC. And if you need to have enough money to retire, you have to do it yourself. And that's where the third pillar comes in. And a lot of countries, in what way, any way or another, they stimulate participating in the third pillar by fiscal measures.
Okay. There's another question here that links back to the discussion we had on social and labor laws and the complexity of dealing with that. It's a question to providers. Is in your view one single provider or player able to deal with all of that, or is there a need for networks of different providers to work together?
Yes, that is indeed boils down to a lot of companies waiting for providers having the ready-made solution with everything in there, either or through a network or, well, it depends pretty much on the geographical spread a company has. If they are working in 80 countries, they can do it from their own sources. But a lot of insurers will need to have networks if they need to comply with all those rules and those fast changing rules. Especially now in the times of crisis, a lot of states are using their pensions and state pensions to fill the gaps and in the budgetary caps of the state. So I think you will still need either or a very close link or to the local states. You need representatives in each and every state to build such a plan.
Okay, okay. So I think we have time for one last question, and that is a question around: do you see in the interviews that you've had, do you see a difference between companies who are headquartered in Europe and who are used to the European environment, and companies who are US headquartered?
Thurstan, maybe, because we parted from that idea, so what did we find out?
No, I mean, I think the answer is no, and we had expected it. I mean, we had expected the I want a 401k in Europe.
Yeah.
And in fact, there were many companies who said we would love to have a 401k in Europe, so single harmonized benefit DC plan for all of Europe. It's a wish that many companies express. So, no, I think the US companies they've been operating in Europe for long enough to know exactly what's going on. So no, we didn't see a cultural bias in that way at all, and we had expected to. So.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think with that we have come to the end of our webinar. I hope you found it useful. If you have not received the white paper yet, then please send us an email and we will make sure you get the paper sent to you. Also, if you have any follow-up questions that you would like to discuss, please get in touch with us. And finally, I would like to thank our panelists, Erik, Heleen, Thurstan. And I would like to thank you for making the time to join us today. Thank you.